Hi, you guys. It's Nurse Amanda. We're here again today to talk about some of the frequently asked questions that we've been getting as a nursing team. And today we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about quarantine and self-isolation and what is this 14 days that we need to do as a contact or a close contact, and just some of the technicalities around those things. Those are some of the things that we've been getting a lot of questions about. So here we go. We're going to talk about quarantine, isolation, and contacts. And this is our Frequently Asked Questions Friday, volume number 2.
Okay, today we will review what is a contact and what is a contact of a contact. When do you need to quarantine and isolate? We'll also talk about travel restrictions and quarantine policies in the state of Massachusetts and scenarios for you to help calculate the 14-day quarantine period at home.
Okay, so first, this is one of the most commonly asked questions, and it's because it is a little bit fuzzy, and a lot of it depends on the specific scenario that you're in. So the question is, what is a contact? What is a contact of a contact? How do you know when you need to stay home? So a case is when a person has a diagnosis of COVID-19, either based off of their symptoms or based off of a positive test. What is a contact? A contact is an individual who has had close contact with the case while that patient was infectious. And a contact of a contact is an individual who has had close contact with the contact of the positive case. So here is a scenario for you. You saw your brother on Sunday afternoon. And then on Monday morning, your brother calls you and your brother says, hey, I just got a call from contact tracing team, and they told me that my friend who I saw on Saturday is a positive case. And they told me that I need to self-isolate for 14 days. I need to go into that 14-day quarantine period and watch and see if I develop any symptoms. Okay, so your brother has received a phone call from the contact tracing team. They've told him, isolate, stay at home for 14 days, don't leave your house unnecessarily, have somebody send you groceries, stay in your own room, use your own bathroom, all these things. They've also told him, hey, at about 4 or 5 days after you saw that person who's a positive case, you can go and get tested, all right? But your brother called and let you know on Monday, and your brother said, hey, remember, we hung out on Sunday afternoon. And you wake up on Monday morning and you're in a panic and you think, should I go to work? Should I not go to work? So in this case, you are considered a contact of a contact. You did not have any direct contact with that positive case. You have one person between you and the positive case. That person between you, your brother, I'm giving people the analogy of that person is our firewall, okay? He's going to stay home. He's going to self-isolate. He's going to watch and see if he develops any symptoms. But hopefully the infection does not reach us because he's doing such a great job at staying home and self-isolating. An important thing to keep in mind as a contact of a contact is that most likely when you were in contact with your brother, he was himself not contagious. So let's say your brother was exposed and your brother does end up testing positive later that week. When your brother ends up testing positive, the contact tracing team is going to contact him, and they're going to backtrack for the 48 hours, for the 2 days before he had the positive test, and ask him who he came in contact with. Because he was doing such a great job at self-isolating, and he was home and he was in his own room and all these things, he doesn't actually have to report any close contacts. He was our firewall. And you yourself did not come in contact with him at a time when he was contagious. And this rule is based in science. It's based in, when we're first exposed to a virus, it needs time to replicate inside of our bodies before that person actually becomes contagious. And this is, like I said, one of the most commonly asked questions that we keep getting, because it's kind of alarming, and it seems a little bit confusing, and it seems a little bit gray. So we wanted to spend a little bit of time just kind of hashing that out with you guys.
Great, thank you, Amanda. So we're going to talk now about when do you need to quarantine and isolate. So contacts should self-quarantine and monitor for 14 days from the last time there was someone who has COVID-19. So what is personal contact? So close contact is someone who is exposed with a confirmed COVID-19 case for more than 15 minutes and they're within 6 feet, and that can be up to 2 days before the symptoms actually onset. So people can be contagious before they show symptoms, which is the important part. So after 14 days with no symptoms, you can stop self-quarantining. And if a symptomatic contact tests positive, you want to identify all the close contacts that met that parameter that I just spoke about, who has tested positive for the person, and you want to monitor from 14 days from the last exposure to the person who had COVID-19. Right.
Okay, so how do we know when we can return to work after we have been ill as staff members? So with COVID-19, you can return to work after the diagnosis when you've had 72 hours fever-free and with improvement of symptoms, especially a cough, and when it has been 10 days since the initial onset of your symptoms. So it's going to be at least 10 days since the initial onset of your symptoms. Some people start to get a little bit worse with their cough around day 7, between days 7 and 10. And if that's happening, you cannot return to work because you have to have improvement of all symptoms. And we do think that cough is one of the symptoms that's the most important to be under control and to be subsiding before you return to work. So if you were diagnosed with something that was not COVID-19, you can return to work after 72 hours fever-free or as indicated from your medical provider. So let's give an example of strep. If you get a diagnosis of strep and you start on antibiotics, then usually you're considered to be not contagious after 24 hours of being on the antibiotic. So then you could return to work. Now, let's say you got a diagnosis of strep, right? You were diagnosed with something that was not COVID-19, but then even though your sore throat got a little bit better, you develop a cough, you develop body aches, you develop fevers, even when you're on the antibiotics. These are persistent symptoms that could suggest that maybe you also have COVID-19. So then you might be asked to be tested or to obtain additional documentation from your medical provider.
Okay, so now we're going to go over the current travel restrictions in the state of Massachusetts. So I do want to stress that the travel restrictions are an ongoing thing. So what could be up to date today may not be up to date at the time of your trip. So I do want to stress that before you leave the state, you look at the mass.gov travel page for the most recent travel guidelines. So as of today, October 9th, if you're returning from an overseas trip or from a state with a more severe outbreak, you need to complete a Massachusetts travel form and be tested 72 hours before your arrival in the state. So that's anytime you leave the country. And you can find the restricted state list on the mass.gov travel website. That is always changing based on the data for COVID-19 cases. Currently, it's safe to go to many of the New England states. If you're unable to obtain testing 72 hours before you arrive in Massachusetts, you need to self-quarantine for 14 days or obtain a PCR test that shows that you are negative for COVID infection. You can get tested in the area or state that you are traveling to, but I do warn that states can have longer processing time for these tests, so that might cause a delay in your return to work when you get back to Massachusetts.
Okay, so now we're going to talk through some of the scenarios for a 14-day self-quarantine following exposure to a positive case. And remember, the following scenarios apply only if you are identified as a contact of a case, but not if you are a contact of a contact. So the contact, the person who's doing this 14-day self-quarantine, they're the one who's our firewall. They're the one who's keeping this from hopefully spreading amongst the community and to us.
Okay, scenario 1. So you had close contact with a person who then was diagnosed with COVID-19 at work or social gathering. You will not have further contact with this person. So in this scenario, you will quarantine 14 days from the last date of contact with that person. So if you saw them on the 1st, then your last day of quarantine would be the 15th, and you can return to work after that.
Okay, scenario 2, you had close contact with a person with whom you shared living space, but you can avoid further close contact. They have their own bathroom, a separate sleeping space, and can avoid using shared spaces in your home for the duration of their illness. So in this case, it's the same as scenario 1. You're going to count 14 days from the last date of contact with them on the 1st, and the 15th is going to be your last day of quarantine, and you can return to work on the 16th.
Okay, so scenario 3. You have close contact with a person with whom you share living space, and you can avoid close contact. However, you have multiple roommates or family members, and another person that you live with has now become sick. Do you have to restart the quarantine anytime someone new gets sick or shows symptoms? Yes, you do. So you need to restart your quarantine and restart the count to 14 days from the first date of symptom onset in a new family member or roommate. So if you started quarantine on the 1st and another roommate gets sick on the 5th, then you would have to quarantine 14 days from the 5th. So your last day of quarantine would be the 19th.
Okay, scenario 4. You cannot avoid close contact with a roommate and family member or you are caring for them while they are sick. So like in my case, I have 2 young children at home. So if either one of them were to be sick, then I would be caring for them. So my 14-day quarantine period will start after their quarantine period ends. So let's say my 4-year-old comes down with symptoms and gets tested and is positive. So we're going to count for him, we're going to count 10 days from the symptom onset. So that's the 30th through the 19th, through the 9th is his 10-day period from symptom onset. And then my quarantine is going to begin on the 9th and go through the 23rd. My last day of quarantine will be the 23rd. I can return to work on the 24th. The reason for this is that throughout the duration of their quarantine period, they are still considered contagious. And so if during that period, some of the virus was able to be passed to me, then again, it might take a little while for the viral load to build up inside of my body for me to show symptoms, or maybe I'm asymptomatic. It might take a little while for it to build up and then for my contagious period to pass. Okay, so here are some of the sources of the graphics and the different resources that we used in this presentation. And we do want to stress that all the information that we provided today was current as of today, October 9th. But we do anticipate that a lot of this information will change because we're learning so much about this virus all the time. And so someday we may have some different information for you guys. All right. Well, thank you so much for coming to our Friday Facts. And please feel free to reach out to us. Thank you for those of you who did reach out and share your questions with us. Please feel free to reach out to us if any further questions arise, or if you have questions about any of this information. We're happy to share what we know and what we've learned.
All right. Bye, guys.
Bye.